everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Hard Money Talk Show. This is your host, Lauren Gertman. I'm glad to be here today. And I am so excited for this interview today. This actually is probably the one that I've been looking forward to the most since I started this show. And that is the interview that I'm talking about today with Dr. Thomas Richardson. And today we're going to break down bipolar and overspending. And this is a topic that is a hot topic because a lot of people don't realize there's so much undiagnosed bipolar that can mask itself in chronic overspending. And so I kind of wanted to dig deep with Dr. Thomas Richardson. He has dedicated his life to the studies of this topic. And I actually researched and found him. And I was like, I got to have him on the show because a lot of people are going and getting into tons and tons of debt and don't realize why they can't control their spending. A lot of times it's because they have undiagnosed mental health issues, especially bipolar, and they go into these manic phases. So we're going to break down how to tell the difference today between manic spending, bipolar spending, addictive spending, and we're going to break it down with Dr. Thomas today. And I'm so excited. So I think that you're going to find so much valuable information in today's episode. So let's go and hop into the interview with him. Thomas, thank you so much for being on the show today. I'm so excited. In the intro, I talked to everybody about how having you on the show. I was researching on Twitter, actually, bipolar and overspending. And I found you and I looked at all your stuff. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to have him on the show. Cause this is the topic that I think, to be honest, I have two siblings that have bipolar. And so I've seen this happen in my personal life. But I've also seen it in my professional life as well. So we're going to talk about bipolar overspending and financial difficulties. And I think this is going to help a lot of people because I think a lot of people go into spending. I mean, when I wrote my book, The Recovering Spender, a lot of people came to me and said, oh my gosh, I think I have mental health issues that I didn't even realize were the reason behind my spending. So talk to us a little bit about what your work is, because I think it's fascinating what you do for a living. So why don't you start there and how you got into all of this?
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me on board. And it's always nice that when I talk about this research beyond kind of the academic and clinical community to, people with bipolar disorder, people who are going to hopefully benefit. So thank you. And thanks for taking interest in the kind words. So I really kind of, I almost fell into this research area a little bit by accident where a few years ago when I was training to be a clinical psychologist. So I work at the University of Southampton and I'm an associate professor there. So I'm a researcher and money and mental health. It's one of my things, but I've also been a clinician, a psychologist working in the NHS, the National Health Service here, so mental health teams. When I was training to be a psychologist, there was a lot of talk at the time about increasing tuition fees for students and really increasing them from, it was well over doubling from one year to the next.
Oh, wow.
So, we were talking about the average debt going up from 20 odd grand to 50 odd grand. And lots of debates in the media and politicians about whether this was a good thing. And nobody was talking about whether this would impact mental health. And I knew that, not surprisingly, there's some research that if you're in debt, that is not great for your mental health. So I kind of wrote a little letter to a journal saying, why is no one talking about mental health about this? Someone got in touch with me and said, should we put this to the test? That became my kind of doctorate thesis. I looked at the impact of that tuition fees and struggling to pay the bills and students. And then I kind of applied that to bipolar disorder specifically for a few reasons. So one, anecdotally, clinically working as a clinician, I knew that lots of that is something that often happens. And if you look in the diagnostic criteria for hypomania, mania, impulsive actions such as impulsive spending is listed. But when I was looking through all the research about the link between debt and mental health, it showed that there's a threefold risk. I did a meta-analysis, which is where you pull together all the research, right?
Okay.
And you're more than 3 times as likely to have a mental health problem if you're in debt. Or looking at it the other way, if you've got a mental health problem, you're more than 3 times likely to be.
So it goes both ways, you're saying?
It does.
Okay.
It does go both ways. There's the chicken and egg thing, which often happens in a lot of research like this, where there's a relationship, you're not sure what comes first. But this review I did, there wasn't anything about bipolar disorder, which really just struck me as pretty surprising. And at a personal level, I also have bipolar disorder. And I know that when I was 18, before I went into hospital, I spent, it wasn't a life-destroying amount of money, but for me at the time, just when I was about to go to university, it was a lot more money than I could afford on a big idea that was very much related to being unwell. So I really wanted to explore that. So I've kind of started with a study here where we got 40 or so people with bipolar disorder, and we wanted to follow them up over time, to try and answer that chicken and egg thing. Is it that finances make your mental health worse? Is it that your mental health means you're more prone to financial problems because maybe it might be harder to hold down a job, etc., unfortunately? So I followed people up over time so I could kind of see what predicts what. And yeah, the financial difficulties did have an impact in terms of how worried people were about their finances. That kind of increased how kind of depressed they were over time. But what was interesting is, like I said, it did work both ways, certainly. So there was like this vicious cycle where kind of anxiety increased the risk of compulsive spending, and then compulsive spending also looped back and reinforced anxiety. So I think I'd kind of gone into this like assuming that mania, being high, hypomanic, that was related to impulse spending. But actually we showed it was also linked to depression, to anxiety, to stress. So it wasn't just about when people are manic. There was also this kind of theme of comfort spending.
Right.
So some of it was looking at this over time and giving people questionnaires, and some of it was interviewing people just about their experiences. And that was one of the themes, is comfort spending. I feel depressed, I buy stuff to make myself feel better. And another theme that I wasn't expecting that showed up was excessive generosity. So people were really generous to friends and family, showering them with gifts.
That's interesting. I have a friend of mine who's bipolar, and when she was manic, she bought like a whole bunch of these super expensive shoes. And then 6 months later, she gave them all away. Like she spent like $2,000 on shoes, and then she gave them all away. And I was like, do you want me to sell them for you online? Like, and make some of your money back? She's like, nope, I'm just going to give them away. So that's interesting that you found that and excessive generosity.
Yeah. Some people said they gave thousands of pounds to charities, which they couldn't afford. So I think there's something nice about it underneath, but it was going too far, and people were kind of regretting it. So that was interesting. But people definitely spoke about this kind of what they called a vicious cycle, where unfortunately they might become manic, overspend, and then they start to crash, and then they start to regret it, they start to feel guilty. Sadly, some people felt suicidal even because of the amount of debt they'd racked up. But then sometimes people then kind of just like spent to kind of make themselves feel better or make their family feel better, so they kind of got themselves into a bit of a loop. That's interesting. So how long did you follow these people for? It was 3 or 4 months, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, it wasn't a lot longer. It wasn't too long. I'd like to go a bit longer, definitely. But we definitely showed it. The relationship kind of worked both ways.
Okay.
And there were lots of other. Yeah, there were lots of other issues about, not surprisingly, people avoiding their finances when they were depressed or anxious. We all kind of sometimes at times go, I'm not going to check my bank balance, especially, this time of year when it's coming up to buying lots of presents or whatever.
Right.
But if you think when people are depressed, they tend to avoid a lot of stuff. It's hard to answer the phone, hard to see friends, hard to get out of bed. So it makes sense that it's going to be even harder to kind of open a bill. And some people were saying, like, I literally kind of let the bills pile up and then I just chuck them in the bin because it feels too much,
Yep. Yeah. So let's go to so I know, because I have an anxiety disorder. So I don't have a bipolar diagnosis, but I do have I have 2 family members. One of them unfortunately passed away. And I've spoken about that on this podcast before. He was an addict, and his bipolar showed up in his addiction to drugs. That's how he tried to manage it. And then I have another family member who is diagnosed bipolar, and this person has had some issues with overspending. And I'll see this person go manic and spend a couple $1,000s and then regret it. But I know in my own spending, like before I got my spending under control, and I even talked about it in my book, I would spend a lot of money when I would feel good. So that high, that manic phase, right, that you talk about. And a lot of people aren't aware of what manic even is. So like, let's talk about the feelings. So let's say like let's say so-called a normal person that has like normal receptors in their brains and normal, neurotransmitters, and how their brain kind of stays normal when it comes to spending, different from the brain with bipolar. Because, I'm a trained counselor, and I was an addictions counselor for many years. So, I did a lot of DSM diagnosis work and all that kind of stuff. And so there's a difference in how our brains actually, accept neurotransmitters and all of that kind of stuff. So like, let's break that down a little bit, because what I really want people to understand coming through at the end of this episode is like, if somebody's listening to this of like, oh my gosh, like I've been spending and I can't figure out why I can't get this under control. Like, oh, maybe I need to go see a doctor. Maybe this person has a deeper issue. Maybe, you know what I mean? Like, so let's break that down. What is the process going on in a brain? Like, what's the difference?
So, yeah, I mean, I haven't researched about the brain specifically. It's
or maybe behaviors, I guess we could say that.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting thought about that. I mean, there's kind of a model about the brain and bipolar disorder that you're kind of more sensitive to reward. Mm-hmm. So those kind of rewards that give you maybe a bit of a sort of a dopamine hit, just kind of, you're more sensitive to them. You kind of feel them that bit stronger. Maybe that explains why, as you said, unfortunately, in family history, there is a strong overlap between bipolar disorder and substance use. Mm-hmm. Most people with bipolar disorder struggle with drug or alcohol problems at some point. So there's definitely something about maybe impulsivity and kind of getting that reward hit. Maybe it kind of hits people stronger. So yeah, drugs might fit into that, or risky sex might fit into that, or spending as well, because it maybe hits the same kind of has that same kind of maybe short-term kind of pleasure impact, I think.
Right.
But I think what I've noticed from my research, which I didn't really expect, is that I think it's not always random. So I think it's very easy to think bipolar spending is kind of, someone once described it to me as, like a magpie, go for shiny things. And, it's very just kind of impulsive. All that feels good, I'll take that. What I've kind of found from my research is it's often, so we found that like it's driven by thoughts around kind of achievement. So people with bipolar disorder tend to have quite high standards, very goal-focused, achievement-focused, and that shows itself when people are manic. They will have big goals they will want to achieve, whether that's socially goals or sexual goals or, work, setting up a business. So we showed that those thoughts led to impulsive spending, right, in bipolar disorder. We also showed that, and this might seem a bit counterintuitive, ironic at first, people who were struggling more financially were actually more likely to impulsively spend a few months later. But I've put that together and made sense of that as, well, actually, I think what happens is people are broke and they come up with a big thought about, I'm going to get myself out of this. They come up with a plan to make money, and their mood kind of increases. They become more impulsive, and they just spending money to make money, essentially. And maybe that kind of backfires. So, I often show this clip online of a kind of a young blogger talking about her impulsive spending related to bipolar disorder. And she says, oh, it's completely random. But actually, when you listen to it, she always buys books around cooking, or she buys, raw food snacks. There's always a theme. It's about her health. It's about cooking. And I think there's often a theme. There's often a goal behind it. It might seem to outside people like a bit of a unrealistic, goal, but I think there is often a bigger plan behind it.
So that's interesting. Yeah. So what you're saying is that a lot of times when there's a manic spend, it's because there's like a big idea, right? Like a big idea or a big goal or a big vision. And then it's like, okay, let's go all in. Let's buy all the things. Let's get all prepared. And you know what? It's funny because I see this a lot in the courses that I teach, is that I'll get people come in, they'll buy my course or my membership. They'll get their budget all set up and all beautified and all pretty. They'll buy all the things, I'll tell them, don't buy anything else. Like I have everything in this membership that you need, like meal plans and, everything you need. Like you don't need to buy anything else. They'll go buy all the color coded pencils and journals and, everything that they need. And then they don't do anything, so
it might be goal focused. And I think that's
very
the thing.
Goal focused. Yeah.
When people are manic, it's really intense, like tunnel vision of like, oh, I've got this idea, but then that can change. You can go really intensely focused on an idea, but then you switch to sort of something else. So maybe that is, your friend who bought the $2,000 of shoes. Maybe there was some kind of plan behind that, because it wasn't $2,000 of random bits. It was all on shoes.
Right. She loves those kind of shoes at that moment.
And there was probably there might have been some plan behind that about wanting to look nice or whatever it is. I don't know. There must have been, I think there was probably something behind that, but then that kind of changed, maybe if her mood changed, and then she went, right, I'm going to give this away. So I think there's a theme. It's something I want to look into more, but just from my own experiences fit into that. So when I was 18, I had my first manic episode. I was worried about money because I was about to go to university. My dad had been made redundant, and I was working kind of in a restaurant to try and save up some money for university. And I came up with this very, very quickly. It escalated quickly, although, it'd been building for a while in retrospect. But this kind of idea I had of buying a synthesizer to make some music with, because I like making music, over a night and then over the preceding days increased to, I'm going to set up a recording studio. I'm going to link it to bars and restaurants. It's going to help the homeless. It's, it was this huge international empire that I was going to set up in 2 weeks with £200. And that felt realistic at the time. So I was spending money on stuff that might seem random, but for me, it was part of that big idea. It was a very grandiose, unrealistic idea. And luckily I got put in hospital before I went. I was literally going to go and see the bank the next day. So luckily that didn't happen. But I went and bought just loads of furniture. All right. Might seem random for me. Nope, that's going to fill the offices. And African djembe drums, the like big kind of drums.
Yep.
I brought 5 of those. Again, that might appear like you're just walking by the shop, you see it, think that looks nice.
In your mind, you need those for the studio.
Right, exactly. And it was something else to do with marketing or something. I can't really remember. But, so I think it often is, part of a kind of a plan to make money, which may well backfire. But so I think that's just, for me, and this is a bit tentative. I want to do more research on this, but that's something that I think maybe is different for that kind of bipolar spending. Is that big ideas, a big kind of plan, and it might be quite impulsive, but there's a bigger theme. I think for people with other mental health problems, you said about anxiety, and I think for people with mental health problems, there's still going to be probably that comfort spending, that kind of, if you're feeling stressed, if you're feeling anxious, if you're feeling a bit down, you might spend stuff to kind of make yourself feel a little bit better temporarily. For me, though, those kind of big ideas is maybe what separates it.
Okay.
Yeah. But
now, do you think, like, because there's a lot of people that are like, like me, like I'm an entrepreneur type, right? So I get these big ideas a lot of times and I'll go with them, but then I can stop myself and say, no, like that's not in the budget. I can't do that. So what's the difference? How can you tell when it's gone too far, right? Because I can stop and say, okay. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs that, have the big visions and the big goals and the big dreams, that can't stop, and then they go into a lot of debt by it. But I know for me, like I can do those big things and have those big dreams, but I have what I call my 24-hour list, right, where I have to write everything down and sit on it for 24 hours, sometimes even a week, to like process it before I act on it, because I can tend to be an impulsive person. And so, when do you know the difference between that? Like if somebody's sitting here saying, okay, well, how do I know the difference between if I'm going to be spending or have this big idea, when do I hit that like point where it's a danger zone?
Yeah. It's a good question. It's quite a hard question to answer, because everyone is going to be different, I think.
Right.
And that's the thing. I've had people ask me, can you help us predict impulsive spending in bipolar disorder? And I think everyone's patterns are going to be slightly different. Like I said, people might have certain themes that they buy. For me, if I spend loads of money on musical equipment, I probably need to worry. But yeah, it's interesting you said about the entrepreneurial thing, because again, the wider research for bipolar disorder shows there is a little bit of overlap between those kind of leadership, entrepreneurial, and maybe being a little bit high risk for bipolar disorder. If you think, people who maybe, are a little bit risk-taking and have some big ideas. And interestingly, there's a US clinical psychologist, John Gartner, who wrote a book which goes through a lot of American historical figures and entrepreneurs, and kind of retrospectively goes back and wonders if they might have been bipolar disorder, such as Henry Ford, for example. So there probably are some people who are maybe on the bipolar spectrum and they have a big idea and it takes off. Mm-hmm. And there's the people I've seen in my clinical practice, the less visible majority who maybe have a big impulsive idea and it doesn't take off and they lose, they go bankrupt, etc. So
right.
There's always, do you see what I mean? There's always that. I think that's something I sometimes say to my patients when they have this big idea. Oh yeah, but what about,
well, because everybody thinks that their big idea is going to be the big idea.
Exactly. Like the Silicon Valley founders who have an idea and now they're billionaires, and that's very alluring for that kind of that grandiose, sort of manic thinking. But I always have to try and reality check that with people that, and you probably don't hear about all the people who risk everything and it doesn't pay off.
Yeah.
But yes, what I was going to say about that, the where to draw the line. I think what you said there, actually, Lauren, about kind of a 24-hour list is really good. That's what I often suggest to people is, that's a barometer, a kind of a warning sign is, do I need to spend this right now? Right, like now, today? And if I do, then you maybe want to ask yourself about, right, is this a sensible idea? Am I maybe a little bit manic? Because the reality is that, there are a few ideas where you have to do them straight away, But when you're really in the grip of kind of manic thinking, it's like, the winning numbers to the lottery. So you feel like, I have to do this now. So certainly for me, I use that as a rule of thumb. It's okay to have a big idea, but if I have to act on it right now, that's a red flag. So I will bounce.
Okay, so that's a great distinction right there. So if you feel like I have to do this, like I have to get to the store right now and buy this, or if I have to go online and buy this right now, like that's a great distinction. Because if you're able to say, nope, I'm going to wait, I'm going to write it down, I'm going to think about it, I don't need to act on it right now, and like rationalize it, then that's a great distinction, I think, between the two. Because I know I've seen this one family member like literally think about it, get in the car and like drive 2 hours to this one store and spend $2,000. And it's like, well,
because it's like the tunnel vision when you're like that. That's all I can kind of think of.
Yeah.
But it's so, if it's still a good idea, it will still be a good idea tomorrow. If you really need to buy this thing, it's still going to be there tomorrow, So I think that's kind of important thing. And it is hard, but trying to get people to just notice when they're kind of doing that. Like,
so are you able to notice when you're in that manic phase? Like if somebody's listening and like, okay, that's me. Like, what's the help? How do you help people, or how can somebody help themselves when they're in that position?
So I'd say it's about early on.
Okay.
Trying, there's a window when people are manic where they have, where they're starting to go up, when you can, work therapeutically with them and they can have a little bit of insight. If it goes really far for some people where they might end up in hospital or have to take a medication, it does get harder. So it's trying to kind of nip it in the bud, to use that expression, try and get in there early. So I think, I always get my patients to do like a relapse prevention plan where they kind of, this is my early warning signs and this is the coping strategy, and money's often in there. So it would be, if I'm spending more than this a day, if I'm buying more of these types of things, if I'm trying to take out a loan or another credit card, and thinking about some practical solutions. I think it's all about putting as much distance as you can between the urge to buy this thing and the ability to do it. I talk to my patients about this idea of urge surfing, which I use in a lot of different, it works with self-harm, it works with people who have drug and alcohol problems, but it also works with spending. That urge to spend, like your relative you got in the car and drove, actually that urge will kind of come and go, right? It will wax and wane. It will like get really strong and it will go down. And eventually a few days later, it's probably, calmed down and that person's mood has started to crash, or, they've become focused on something else. So trying to just put a little bit of distance, and the term here for gambling is called positive friction, which I like. Okay. Positive friction, making it harder. I've had people with bipolar disorder say to me, I want it to be harder to take out a loan. I want it to be harder to get into more debt. Here some banks have put on a gambling block where you can block all gambling, and then you have to wait a few days to turn it off, which is the key thing. So you can't just go, I'll turn it off and start gambling straight away. You have to wait. And then
I love that. That's such a great idea. Good, isn't it?
Yeah. And by the time you can actually gamble again, hopefully that urge has gone down and you go, no, actually I need to, I'm working on this in terms of maybe some tech solutions for bipolar disorder to try and do a similar thing. Because the problem is that finances is all going to frictionless, isn't it? Contactless payments, apps remember your card details, websites remember your card details. I've got, you can just play with your watch, and that's great for most people.
Not for people who have spending issues.
Exactly. Yeah. And this is all increased with COVID, hasn't it? More contactless, less cash. So I will advise people who impulsively spend, just take out cash and not a card and not your phone. And then when you spend it, it's gone. Can you put it in a basket rather than actually buy it? There's something called Icebox if you just Google it, and it's like an extension to your browser where it turns your basket into a block of ice, and you have to wait an hour before you can actually purchase.
I'm writing that down, because I always tell people, like, there's this movie called Confessions of a Shopaholic. I don't know if you've ever watched it. Have you seen it? I haven't watched
it. I probably should. I've heard of it, but I haven't watched it. Yeah.
And the girl literally, because I tell people this all the time, and I talk about it in my book and in my programs and stuff. And it's like, literally, if you have a spending issue, you need to do either one of two things. You need to cut up those cards.
Yeah.
Don't cancel them, cut them up, or literally freeze them in like a Ziploc bag with ice. Yes. And in this movie, the girl like does this. She freezes her cards, but then she goes and she finds this new pair of like $1,000 shoes, and she runs home and she takes out that block of ice, and she takes one of her shoes and she's like chipping at it for like an hour trying to get her credit card out of this block of shoes. And then by the time she gets done, she's just like too tired to go get the shoes. And it's like, that's what we need to do, right? We need to exhaust ourselves, take everything out of our browsers, take all of our credit cards out, don't use Apple Pay, freeze our cards, take them out of our wallet. I mean, our cars do not automatically drive to the store and the credit card fly out of our wallet and like, so we have to, me as a spender, like, I've put up safeguards in myself. Like, there's certain stores that I don't go into. There's certain things that I know that are weaknesses of mine. Like, I love home decor. So if I go into a home decor store, like, I'm toast, so I just don't go into those stores. But it's a level of self-control and like knowing my weaknesses that I just have to put up. But again, if I was manic and I just saw, I have to get to the store right now because I have to decorate this wall behind me. And like, if I don't do it, like the world's going to end, like that distinction is, I think, is going to be really helpful for people.
Yeah. So asking yourself, why now? Why does it have to be now?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if you can get friend, family member, partner to maybe ask that question as well.
I like that. Can you ask me, why do you have to do it right now?
Yeah. Yeah. That's something
that could
my
start
wife
some
asked
fights
me.
though.
Does it need to be done? It can. Yeah, it can, and
it's like, did I ask you? But maybe you can say, I give you permission to ask me this because I want help. I give you permission to ask me this because I don't want to be this way anymore. And I might be angry with you at the moment, but this is what we can do to get through this situation and kind of have a conversation that way.
Well, I think it's about having these discussions when people are stable before
Correct.
it gets to this. That's like with my patients, we will have a agreement. If you have a big idea, can I challenge you on it? So it's asking for permission. But you're right, you do need to be careful because, again, using that metaphor of the winning numbers to the lottery, some people have broached this idea of people with bipolar disorder having like a guarantor where they like a family member has to agree before money is released or a loan or something is bought. But you have to be careful because it could lead to conflict, because if you feel like you've got the winning numbers to the lottery and your partner's standing in the way saying, I'm not letting you buy that, so this is why I'm trying to think of some sort of tech solutions to this. And
that would be awesome.
If anyone ever does have any kind of ideas just about, any ideas to share, I'm always willing to listen, wanting to listen to people with lived experience for their ideas. But definitely surfing that urge. And actually it relates to, you've probably heard about mindfulness. I know it's kind of quite, I'm not
I love mindfulness.
Good stuff.
Yep. Yeah. I've had a couple, I have a couple interviews on the show where we talk about money mindfulness and meditation and so in the drug and alcohol counseling space, there's a lot of, okay, if you have an urge to drink, go do something different, right? Go for a walk, go exercise, move a muscle, change a thought, those kind of mentalities. Go clean your bathtub, do something different. Just do anything other than the urge, because you got to ride it out, just ride the wave, and that whole concept is very similar to spending too.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I want to spend a ton of money, usually I know it's when I'm feeling good, because I don't usually want to shop when I'm feeling depressed. Like if I'm down and out, like I'm like, I just want a cup of coffee and like to watch a movie, that's kind of my mentality. But when I want to shop, it's usually because I'm on like a high,
Yeah.
But I've learned for myself that the things I need to do to keep myself safe, the 24-hour list, don't react, meditate, do those things. But that's been over, years of practice and time and therapy and meditation and all of that.
Yeah. And it's something I use a lot personally. I use it with my patients. And, there's quite good evidence for bipolar disorder. It helps with depression, etc. But for my study specifically for this impulsive spending, actually what we showed that people who weren't very mindful, they were running on autopilot. They weren't very aware of their thoughts, their emotions. They were more likely to impulsively spend when we followed them up a few months later. So there was a direct link there. And it makes sense with that impulsive spending because it's that urge surfing, So like you said, with the substance use, using mindfulness to try and notice the urge and sit with it rather than, push it away, which doesn't work because it's just like, or, giving into the urge is just sort of mindfully, I'm noticing the thought to buy this. I'm now feeling it here in my body and kind of just breathing into it. Yeah. It sounds counterintuitive, but that can help as well. So I think
it does. It's that mindfulness piece of knowing, okay, when I have a big idea, I'm going to feel the urge to want to go buy all the things for the big idea. That's going to give me a high, and that's going to give me the excitement to go buy all the things. But then once I come down, I'm going to feel bad. So we're not going to do that. I can recognize this now, and recognizing that before you get to that super manic phase. If you started 2022 with more debt than you'd like to have, you're not alone. Debtcom is here to help. Whether you still have holiday credit card debt to pay off or student loan payments are starting to build up again. Maybe you even have debt collectors that are hounding you for payments you just can't make. The experts at Debtcom can help. Finally, one website can help you solve your debt problems. Credit cards, back taxes, student loans, medical debt, collections, you name it, Debtcom can help you solve it. And they do it with no judgments, because they understand that when people end up in debt, it's usually for things outside their control, like job loss or divorce or some other hardship. So if you're in debt, visit laurengrutman.com/debt to get the relief you need, or call 888-431-2044 to get a free consultation with a debt relief specialist. Find solutions to get out of debt, fix your credit, and get on the path to achieving your financial goals. When life happens, visit Debtcom. From what my research does and has been with bipolar is you can't necessarily control when you get to that manic phase, right? So can you? Like, can you control when you get to that manic phase? I mean, is it just inevitable that you're going to reach that? So how do you control when you get there, not spending?
Well, I mean, like I said, I think, one of my jobs here is leading teaching on CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy for bipolar disorder. And there's quite good evidence that actually people who use this therapy, people who do kind of relapse prevention groups, family therapy, they are less likely to relapse. And if they do relapse, it doesn't go on for as long. They're less likely to be in hospital. So yeah, there is evidence that it can reduce that. It doesn't happen all the time, but yeah, there's definitely that window, and it might be quite brief where you can kind of get in there and try and reduce stimulation and kind of try and calm things down and take action to stop it escalating.
Okay.
Yeah. When people are
so I'm wrong in that. I'm wrong in that area, because for some reason I thought like you're just on the upward slope and you just have to ride it out. Like you're just, you know what I mean? So
I don't think so. Okay. I don't think so. I think the issue. No, I think you can. I think the main issue is sometimes people enjoy it in the early stages. That's what's difficult to work with.
Yeah.
So actually, a lot of people will say, "But I enjoy it. It feels great. I've got energy. I'm hilarious, and everyone wants to be with me because I'm buying the drinks, and I'm good fun to be around." So I think that's kind of the hardest bit in that early stages. People kind of, on the one hand, they're like, "Oh, I'm becoming unwell. I need to just calm down and watch film tonight and take my medication." And then there's part of you going, "Oh, this is fun. I can use this," and spending might be part of that. That's kind of, I think, the issue you're working with there. But there's definitely evidence it can reduce the risk that you're going to relapse. Yeah.
Okay. So let's go back to what you said about medication. So if somebody's listening and they're like, okay, I think I might have an issue. What do you think is the first step for somebody to go and get help for this? Therapy, medication, behavioral, CBD, what CBT is what you said, yes. Right? Is okay.
Not CBD. That's different.
Yes. Now that's in my mind. I heard CBD and I'm like, that's not what he said. So, because I know there can be a bunch of different ways to test for this.
Yeah. So, I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't prescribe medication, but there are lots of different kind of medication options out there that can be really helpful. I think just to say, it links back to what you were saying earlier, Lauren. Not to kind of freak out and assume that you have bipolar disorder if you impulsively spend. There are people who have. There's definitely an overlap between mental health and kind of. You're at greater risk of this kind of impulse spending if you have mental health problems such as bipolar disorder, but it doesn't mean necessarily, so don't worry about that. There are other kind of mental health problems that might be linked to it, and it might just be, so it doesn't necessarily mean, it's not diagnostic, you wouldn't get a diagnosis just on the basis of that. There's lots of other things such as episodes having to go on for quite a long time, days, weeks, them to cause problems in your relationships, in your work, in your functioning, and that to be very sort of out of character for you, that kind of high, and maybe your mood being quite elevated or you being quite irritable. So there's lots of other things. It's not just about that. I think just, and I guess it's hard to give advice just coming from different countries and different health systems, but I think trying to ask for help early on, whether that's for your GP here, family doctor in the US. I mean, something I've done with, BiPolar UK here, which is a charity here. I helped them with the report recently. You find there's a massive, nearly 10 years between someone's first manic episode and when they get formally diagnosed. So,
oh wow,
here at least it's still a big lag, and a lot of people get missed. And I think it might get missed because the manic episode's quite short, or it might, people go for help when they're depressed, but they probably don't when they're manic, unless they kind of end up in a lot of trouble or in hospital. So yeah, there is a lag. So I think trying to ask for help and think about other times when this happened. That's the thing, is that a doctor might not ask, a mental health professional might not ask. So there are certainly assessments and questionnaires which kind of ask you to look back and think, was there a time in your life when you were not your normal mood and you spent more, you were more impulsive, you were more risky, you had more energy, you didn't sleep, all of that. So they're trying to get around that and kind of ask you retrospectively about when that would happen. Because to make a diagnosis, they would need to know that this had happened a couple of times, not just a sort of a one-off. So there are questionnaires, but I think certainly beware of kind of Dr. Google and just Googling it and self-diagnosing, because that's what I was thinking. Like, a lot of people will like Google, am I bipolar because of my spending? And it's like, I don't know if you want to do that, because I know for my family members that were diagnosed, it took years of like journaling and, tracking moods and all of that. And these people would have manic episodes that would last for months, and they would be like no sleeping for a week at a time, and then followed with not being able to get out of bed for a week at a time. And, those kind of things. I mean, and there's so many different varying ways of coping, and varieties of bipolar, I guess I should say. But I think that you made a good distinction of, just because you have a spending problem doesn't mean you have bipolar. I think you made a very important distinction, which is I have to do it right now. Like, I have to go right now. For me, and if it's like part of a bigger picture, if it links into a big grandiose idea, whether it's around work or, some people it's spending money to try and kind of change the world, or a kind of a very nice idea, but one that's, quite unrealistic, for example, and very impulsive. It has to happen now. I think those are the distinctions. Yeah. I think about like, did you watch the documentary on like the Fire Festival? Yes, I did. Yeah. That popped into my head as we've been talking. I'm like, that guy, I wonder, because he was, his idea was grandiose and he just went for it. I wonder, who knows what happened. Yeah. We can't diagnose people, but, I just know that, I've seen it so many times just in my practice and in my courses and memberships and all those kind of things, that it's very difficult to spot, the difference in somebody, whether they're impulse spending or bipolar spending. That's not for me to judge, but I can always say, what, you might want to go and get checked out, because this seems to be an issue. This seems to be something that's happening over and over and over again. I think keeping, there are apps you can keep diary logs on. But I think keeping a log on it is helpful, because it's hard to remember this stuff, looking back retrospectively. And, as a psychologist, I know there's this thing called context dependent memory. So like, you're more likely to remember this conversation we've had in that room. Right. When you're in that room, you can remember it, think back to it more, if that makes sense. But then the same thing happens with your mood. So when you're depressed, it's very easy to think back to difficult things that have happened other times you were depressed. When you're manic, it's easy to think back to good things that have happened and other times you've been manic. And So it's, and I know personally when I try to give an account of like when I've relapsed, it's very hard to think back. And I often will get people to draw out like a timeline of like, what my mood is like and what was going on in my life at the time. So yeah, keeping a log of that, I think that would be helpful for a professional, definitely.
Do you have any apps that you recommend?
Well, I do some sort of working with Bipolar UK, and they've got an app they've just released, which is free. Yeah, so just search the Bipolar UK mood tracker, I think it's called.
Okay.
Yeah. I think just to say as well, for people who maybe do have that diagnosis, bipolar diagnosis and impulsive spend, and this will probably help people without a bipolar diagnosis, just some practical things are, we said about putting distance, some things you can do. You said about freezing the credit cards, which is great. And actually it was some of my bipolar patients who introduced me to that, which is a good thing. So, can you make sure that like websites and apps don't save your credit card details? Because it's so easy just to click, do it, buy it with your thumb. If you have to actually go and get your credit card and enter the details, that might just be that little barrier, that little bit of friction you need to go, hang on here.
Yep.
I have, and I suggest quite a few patients have this, I have a really old non-smartphone, really basic one that I have tucked away in a cupboard for emergencies if I become manic, so that I can stay in touch with the people I need to, but I don't have access to the internet. Yeah, because then I can't, do stuff on social media when I'm not very well, and then then people can't impulsively spend because it's so much easier on a smartphone. So yeah, just thinking about some sort of practical things. I don't know how it works in the US, but I've had a lot of people with bipolar sort of say they want it to be harder to take out debt because they can take out £10,000 and spend it on a car just like that.
Yeah, it's very easy to take out debt here. I mean, you can take out a credit card, you can take out a secured loan of credit within a couple days.
So there is a way in the UK, I don't know how it works in the USA, there is a way to add a note to your credit file if you want to, saying, I have bipolar disorder, please, please take this into account or something like that. Yeah, but this is something I'm working on. And again, I'd appreciate, ideas about some kind of technology is a problem for impulse spending and bipolar disorder, but can we also make it part of the solution?
Right. I love what you said about having that non-technology smartphone tucked away, so that if you feel that by that manic coming on, it's like, okay, put the smartphone away, pick out the other one. We're going to use this until I feel more stable.
Strip it back to basics.
Back to basics.
Yeah.
I love that because it's all about creating a safe place for yourself, okay, I might not be able to control this right now, but I do know that when I become this way, I can create a safe place for myself. And I think that's so important to be able to create that safe financial place for yourself. And
and it's about, like I said, doing these things when you're feeling well, when you're stable. But I think it's important to give you some ownership of it. Like, this is my coping strategies for if I am going well, if I'm becoming unwell, to stop me spending more. That helps you feel a little bit more in control of it. You have some ownership of it. If you've kind of written a list of this is what I do when I'm becoming manic, is easier to buy in and do that than if you've got friend or family going, you need to do this, because when you're manic, you might just go, la, 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 I'm doing my own thing,
Right. Let's, as we wrap this up, I want to go real quick to the friends and family. If you're listening to this as a friend and family member who's recognizing this in a friend or family member, I found as a family member of somebody that deals with this, the worst thing I can do is be like, you shouldn't be doing that, because it makes it worse. So like, I think you said an important thing about the person that is dealing with this taking ownership over it. And it's almost like a drug addict. Like, they're not going to get well until they decide that they're ready to get well. And do you find that the same thing when you're dealing with somebody with bipolar and impulsive spending, that they need to make that decision for themselves? Or do you feel like you can force this on somebody?
I mean, the research I've done, people know that it's a problem. People know, people do regret it. It's just usually when their moods start to crash, if they've been kind of manic. So I think it's different. I don't think it would usually be the case where people don't realize, they don't see it as a problem. I think people know it's a problem. Yeah, that's definitely what my experience.
So they've accepted already. It's just,
I think so. The difference is, when you're feeling okay, you're stable in mood, or maybe when you're down, that you spend too much. It's just that short window when you're more manic that you might lose sight of that, and it seems just like a really good idea.
Got it.
So that, I think it's different. It's in that kind of short window. So then I think it is just about the family members, as I said, having these conversations and having a backup plan that you agree together when you're stable, because it's going to be harder to have those conversations when someone is is not very well. So you're trying to agree the stuff together. Okay, do we have a plan B? Can you give me your credit card or something like that? But agreeing this stuff in retrospect, and then it's kind of a bit easier maybe to buy in if you go, look, we did agree this, so it's not confrontational. It's not, you need to give me that. It's, listen, I'd always be kind of quite on the fence. I understand this feels like a good idea. This is my stance as a therapist, but I understand this feels like a good idea. I know it feels like you need to do this right now. I'm just wondering, if we look back at your relapse prevention plan, I'm wondering if you're ticking a few boxes, and I'm wondering if maybe we need to do some of this stuff. Maybe we need to put some of this plan into action to kind of just be cautious and let's see where it goes. So it is about, it's about compromising and having this kind of shared understanding.
I love how you said that. That is so, like, I'm wondering if you might be checking a few boxes. That's so much less like, you're checking some boxes, we need to do something. You know what I mean? That's so much less finger pointing. And I think if people were able to learn how to communicate better when talking with their significant others or family members about these type of issues, that the conversations would go so much differently.
There's research that the higher your mood goes, the less you listen to other people.
Oh yeah.
And it's not about being difficult. It's that tunnel vision where you've got the idea, and anyone who doesn't believe you just, they're naysayers, they're non-believers, they don't get it.
It's like you're a tornado ripping through everybody's life and they're just in the ride, So
having these conversations when people are well and getting something like written, I always encourage people, like, even if it's just a page or two of, these are my early warning signs, these are my triggers, and this is what I should do if I'm starting to become unwell, and spending probably often on that. But then, the person with bipolar disorder has a copy, and their partner has a copy, and their mum has a copy, and their doctor has a copy. And you're all reading off the same page there.
Love
and
that.
there's more likely to get that buy-in, I think, if you've kind of, this sort of collaborative, like, shared understanding.
I love that. Well, I think you've given us a lot of really awesome information. This has been really helpful for me, personally, having family members, but also with my own moods, and also with just the people that I help in my community, to be able to identify that and maybe get them some help. So I appreciate you coming on. Why don't you tell people, where people can find you online?
Yeah. So, I'm on Twitter, just at Dr. Tom Richardson, very imaginative Twitter handle. If you just Google Thomas Richardson, University of Southampton, there's a list, and it's got kind of a page about all my research about financial difficulties and mental health, and there's linked to kind of videos and stuff like that. And this is something I'm continuing to research, so I always advertise if I'm looking for participants and stuff. That I'd really appreciate people's help. And equally, sometimes I have people with lived experience, help me out discussing my research to check if it rings true and if it kind of sits well with people. So I'm always looking for people to kind of help out. So get in touch, share your thoughts. I'd really appreciate that. Yeah,
thank you so much for coming on the show. Your work is very impactful. So I appreciate you and all that you're doing. So, and I'll leave everything that we talked about in the show notes so people can get in touch with you. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode of Hard Money Talks. That episode was amazing for many different reasons. I think that this is a common question that comes up when people are in my financial renovation community, where they're in my membership, where we're talking about, am I bipolar? Do I have mental health issues? What's going on? Why am I spending so much? And the questions that come up over bipolar are ones that come up often. And so today really, I think, captured a lot of the answers to those questions. So I definitely recommend that you check out Dr. Thomas Richardson. Oh my gosh, my cat is, if you're watching the video of this, my kitten is showing up in the video. So if you're watching the video, here is Toby, my little kitty, that is climbing all over me in the studio. But I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you. And if you go to laurengrootman.com/podcast, I would love a review of this show. I would love for you to subscribe. And you can check out my financial renovation community where we talk about these topics and I walk you through how to successfully have a great financial renovation from start to finish. And you can go to laurengrootman.com/community to check that out. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I'll see you next week in another episode. Bye.